Well, I think right now we will start our panel discussion, right? All the questions that hasn't been answered or you have thought of, we can start this. But first, I want to thank all the presenters. We have Professor Fhaner, Professor Ward, and Professor Wright, and also the two students shared very thoughtful, insightful comment about teaching and learning. So we will start the questions, but I don't have questions coming from the audience, from the participants. Where do we get that question? But while we're waiting for questions, and Zheng and I were co-monitoring this panel session, but I will start with a question. So how do you all think, and this seems like all of us are in the panel, which is good, but this is for all the presenters or all the our panel. So how do you think this online teaching and learning experience will help us in our future teaching and learning? And that's more in person, right? Our university, we're coming back almost 100% in person now. So how is this, the past year, how is this experience helping us dealing with our new semester, new year, back to normal, new normal?
I think one quick thing is probably the student hours. They don't have to be in person. They can be done remotely. So I think that's probably one change that the flexibility in terms of that. I think that's one thing that we can take from this past remote learning to the fall semester.
That's a good comment. Mm-hmm.
Tony, just from a personal perspective, I think, I mean, like I shared, I was very overwhelmed at times, and the new technology and working through that and figuring out how to adapt and was really tough. But I actually did find it in the end. I think it broke me, and I'm rebuilding in a way that has me reinvigorated and interested in teaching again and pedagogy. Because when you can always do what you've done, it's always, you know, it is easy to fall into those patterns. And so on a personal note, I find that I feel more interested in re-engaging in teaching practices. And I know from other faculty, they're feeling the same way. As much as people are feeling tired and uncertain, there are little things that we feel we can try differently again. And I think that's a good thing.
Very good.
Okay. Yes, thanks for a very good talk with last three professors speak and two students. I have actually a question for the two students. Can I ask, like, during this pandemic year, you have learned through this, online course, the learning outcome. How much is, the quality your learning outcome is dropping? How much, or is no drop at all? For Celeste and that's, who is that student? Jessica. Yeah, hello.
Hello. Jessica.
No, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, my question for the two students, Jessica and Celeste.
Mm-hmm. It was about like any difference in learning outcomes, or like
how much you say that you have limited your learning outcome, or like have come quality dropping in your compared to the previously learning style, for example.
Mm-hmm. I'd say it's a similar, like I think I've achieved the similar learning outcomes as I have when I was in person. But I think a lot of the credit has to go to the professors for making sure to like emphasize assignments and like deadlines, and making sure like to provide with the skills. Like I think my completion in order to achieve those learning outcomes didn't really change because I was still motivated to get the work done and everything. So I think overall for me, the actual like achieving those learning outcomes didn't really change.
What do you agree, Celeste? Yeah, Celeste, are you still online? No. Okay,
Okay,
so
I want to come back to my earlier question about how this online experience will be helping us in transitioning back to in person. And I very much agree with what Amanda said. This tested your ability, your creative side of things. You have to go outside your box. You have to be creative in designing your course content, and you have to understand the student better. To me, this is just student personal interaction. You care about the student. My student, if they're not coming to class, they're not participating. What's going on? So allow us to be really close, in close contact with students. So allow us to be more compassionate and really on the individual basis, caring about student and their learning. So that creativity and more personal connection, that's something I learned throughout the past year. Yes, Matt has a comment.
I'll jump in and say one of the things that's been a larger part of the discussion on our campus is this idea of moving at student speed. And I wonder at what point that pendulum is going to move further to the other direction, where the instructor's expectations or the expectations of the instructor from the students for all of the consistent, constant, quick feedback interaction, because we have these new technologies that we're familiar with. I wonder how that's going to play a bigger role in, I guess, the overall time that education takes now, because it's much easier to get in touch with each other. That also means it's a little bit harder now for the students to understand why we're not up at 2 a.m. answering that one email, why we didn't get back to them within a few hours. So that's one of the things that I think might be a change as well, as those expectations, and we all should be aware how we manage them so our personal lives don't get decimated in that process.
I can see some questions from the audience. I think it's, I will start reading them. I don't know if Tony have access to those. Did any of the students here had a remote or recorded lab experience? Or does any of the panelists have feedback from students? And this, Celeste and Jessica, did you have that experience, the remote or recorded lab class?
For me, I had, because I'm in my 4th year now, so I had one lab in the fall semester and one in the winter, but it was not like a traditional like chemistry or wet lab. It was more like group projects and everything. So for those, it was all done remote, like through Zoom. It wasn't, none of them were recorded though. And it was just mostly group work and such, and interacting with professors sometimes too.
Let's see. Celeste, did you have that experience, a lab, recorded lab, or?
Yeah, I did have one online at the end of last spring semester when COVID first started. My general microbiology class got moved to online, and that didn't affect it too much. But then this semester we had a more intentional. My food microbiology lab was a hybrid course, and that was pretty successful. I would say we had in-person labs basically every week, and so we were able to get hands-on experience still. And then we had kind of group time work on the final project, hybrid online. That was a good use of both, I think, online and.
Thank you.
Okay, I do now see the questions coming from the audience. Let me read another question. I think this is more targeted at the student. So how do you think of hybrid learning has affected knowledge retention? And do you think that you can actually be parsed out from the symptoms of current stress that we are all under? This is college retention under the current stress. So Jessica and Celeste.
Me personally, I actually really enjoy hybrid learning. I don't really like online. I don't think I learned as well from that experience, but I think hybrid is a good experience. Like the lab that I just mentioned for microbiology, I was able to get hands-on experience still. And then like for the group work, we didn't really have to be in person for that. We just worked, in a small group online. So we were still able to like see one another and work on a Google document together at the same time. So it didn't really affect the group work at all. I think it was good for that situation. I think hybrid is pretty effective usually.
I'd want to reflect what Celeste is saying. Like I prefer hybrid learning as well. Working in the group work as well. I want to second that as Google Docs and collaborative software being on Zoom, it was all much easier to be done. And I think it also allows like group work to be more flexible too, because if we were in person, we'd have to be going to a library or booking a study space somewhere. So I feel that really helped group work too.
Okay, I have a general question. This may be for everyone about expectations. Do you feel like the assessment, using assessment for the learning expectation? Because I have heard from our faculty that students are doing, some they say they're doing poorly, but others say they're doing wonderful. They're even better than in-person learning, just their general from their general assessment tool. But do you think that because we've used a different assessment tool, do you think compared to last year, to your previous year, do you think our standard may have been lowered, or do you think that in general, this is similar?
It's much.
One of the things that I'm sure many of us ran into are websites like Chegg, and just Google finding answers to assessments if they're from any aspect of testing. I know I've personally felt some fatigue in terms of having to consistently make new assessment material that couldn't be found anywhere else, because I understood the limitations of test bank material very high. And just Chegg in general, you can get a lot of answers, a lot of material covered through those resources. Personally, it's just my own views, my own thought process, and what I saw. I think students' grades, if they were even remotely involved, were inflated over the past year a bit because of those outlets for finding the right answers to assessment questions. However, I saw a more bimodal distribution of grades and academic performance than I have in a long time. And I think it's because that lack of engagement then sent them in a completely different direction. So it's hard, and I'm not sure there's another way around it than continuously making in-house assessments. And that just then puts more time and energy into the maintenance of a course.
I have a comment.
To judge in terms of the differences, because I think I'm going to using a learning management system for some of the online tests, and to curb some of that cheating is to make sure that they're timed within, not giving people too much time so that they don't have time to look up these answers. So there are kind of ways that we're trying to police, because I think fairness needs to be maintained, because those students, yes, you could lock the screen, but they have other devices that they can look up the answers. So how is that fair to the student who is not having these other devices? So trying to make sure that you're being fair to all, I think that's been a challenge. So I think assessment, it's too early to gauge whether we are doing things right or wrong, but just making sure, again, emphasizing ethics, because it's an automatic F or fail in my class if you're caught.
Only for me, if I may mention how I assess my students in food camp, especially when I was teaching the lecture class last spring, I think I've changed a lot when in terms of assessment. Instead of just giving them quizzes that are, here's the definition, what's the term, or the true or false. What I've done in the past really is just homework based, where I gave students 2 or 3 articles per chapter, ask them questions about the article, and then they just have to read the articles for them to be able to answer the questions. And in case of like my final exam last spring, I gave them 24 hours to complete, but the questions were more applications. So, but I think it's still difficult to maintain that they're not asking each other because they have that 24-hour period. Really like, oh, what's your idea about this question? Because they have their phone numbers. So I think, of course, they will still share, but based on the grades that they received, at least when we moved from in-person to online last spring, it was pretty similar. I wouldn't say it's better. It was pretty similar. Yeah.
We had a different experience at Rutgers. I worked pretty closely with our undergraduate program coordinator. And when I found that grades in my classes were higher than before, I talked to her, and we found that across the board in our undergraduate classes and even some of the graduate classes. And we think that in talking to the students and tracking things through, we didn't change the exam structure and we didn't change the grading, but students did not have the distraction of all the social activities on campus. So they weren't going to parties. They weren't, having chats and gatherings in the dorms. They were staying at home and focusing on their studies. We did have a bimodal distribution, one that was kind of skewed. It wasn't even by any means. So most of our students were scoring higher grades because they didn't have distractions. But then we had some students who had taken on extra jobs because their families were left without income. So everybody was really scraping whatever they could get. So they had extra stress and extra demands on their time. So they were struggling more than they had before. But overall, our students, because they were focused, were doing better in the classes.
Yeah. So I have a comment. So what we are dealing with like a master or PhD level. So what we did for exam is that we define more open questions. I mean, no exact answer. So it's more debatable questions. So it's actually ask students to read an essay or read a kind of article. For during the semester, we have a full assignment for the students. So they have to really, address the questions with open answer, no definition. So from there, you could see how they could understand in depth or just, on the superficial understandings. That's give us to still have like a Poisson distribution of the grade. They still can have a very good, very symmetric distribution. That's we are doing right now. But still, of course, this was a great adding to the work for the professors that they have to spend a lot of time to evaluate. I mean, generally it's not one person who do this. So we have like a panel. So like we have a kind of criteria to how to grade. Like this essay, it's a kind of assignment levels. Then we use that criteria, like is any element has missing, or like is the discussing has not intensively it's like a deviate from the point we ask them to address. From there, like we can actually get a very fair grading to the students' learning outcome. That's something we are doing right now. Of course, this is more like applicable for master level. Maybe for the bachelor, it's difficult because they need to learn some very basic concept and some definitions. Maybe it's not applicable to the undergraduate students.
There is a comment from the audience. So this apparently is from university. We also had higher marks and bimodality. However, we all estimate that the student did learn less.
Okay.
Just a comment.
If I can add on quickly to the comments about kind of the open-ended and like more practical questions of exams. I also really enjoy that kind of testing. It's very common being a French major as well for my French degree. And then I would say less so for my food science degree, but I really do enjoy like my food engineering classes and my food microbiology classes semester, like writing a final report or taking like short answer, like industry type application questions. I think I do learn a lot more from that. And also like thinking about like the Bloom's taxonomy thing as well. I think you learn a lot more if you're able to like evaluate critically and like show understanding and repeat that. sort of
Yes, yes, I agree with you, Celeste. Yes, the students have really spent time to dig in, to understand the central concept. They have to spend a lot of time to organize, to structure, how to write an introduction, how to like put everything, and how to end up with a conclusion. And yeah, it's really time consuming. But from there, you can see that whether these students could be a talented researchers in the future because they were well organized or they were all poorly organized. Their ideas, they were also able to make a clarified presentation or not clarified presentation. You could see there from that kind of report.
So for my class this semester, I'm teaching a 100% in-person class. So mid-semester, the midterm exam student actually did poorly and they all asked for open book test. So test is actually 1 o'clock today. So yes, I'm giving them open book, open note, but still just 2-hour test. So they have to review everything, but making the test is more difficult. So higher Bloom taxonomy, higher level learning. So I'm making up questions that's really all application oriented, and then integrate all the different chapters, knowledge from all over together. So they'll be able to use their notes, their basic knowledge, and be able to synthesize to give me a comprehensive answer for solving a particular problem. So I think this forces us to be creative in how to test student, and also for student to think in higher level. And then before the test, I gave them examples. This is a complex problem. You need to be thinking about all sorts of different areas and be able to propose something. So we will see how they do. Clay Johnson is in my class, so he's probably busy preparing his finals, this last final exam.
Yeah, I guess, shall we continue discussion? We are running out of time, right?
I have one more question if we have time. We have a couple of minutes more, and this is for all of you. I'm curious about how do you think that your teacher-student interaction and feedback process was affected during this online instruction? Do you see differences? Do you see it was negatively affected, or you see that you overcame well that challenge?
My students always told me that with the hybrid and with the online, they have difficulty collaborating with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's sure.
I'm not sure how they define collaboration, but but it could be asking what your answer is or not, or it could be like, can we help solve this problem together? But still, most students are having difficulty collaborating with each other. Yeah,
I can answer the collaboration questions from my own experience. So we're practicing molarity, using titration to solve to determine total acidity and molar concentration, percent concentration, all the basic conversion. So I try to explain different ways on the board, doing practice together. And then I will have a couple of questions for students to work on. So my way of solving the problem may be very different from how they think the problem. So if they work together in a group in a different way and collaboratively talking about their approach, and the light bulb just come on, you can see their amazement and how they solve the problem. So I think collaborative learning in classroom group activity together, I mean, that's just one example.
I think for me, what's missing is that random interactions with the students, which I really miss, because everything right now has to be scheduled. But when they come to class asynchronously, that 5 minutes before someone can ask a question and you can, it's just more efficient. And so I found I miss that, because for you to be able to know everything has to be scheduled now if they don't ask the questions in class. So I see that as a difference.
I was just going to say, I miss that spontaneity as well. And I find that in class, I have to work harder in the class meetings with most cameras off. And there'll be few students who participate regularly, but you also don't want to always single them out. I found it extra challenging to develop connections, but I took advice from someone else, but Laura, you recommended this idea of having introduction videos, and I did that with my class, and almost every student posted a video. I felt like that was a good start to normalize and humanize all of us. One of the other things I did is most lectures, I had class meetings, I had something that we completed actively, and the students could submit evidence of that quickly at the end of class, even just a screenshot. And if they could do that 5 times over the semester for 1% grade, so they had lots of choice. And because it was a small class, I had the luxury that I could review all of those quite easily. And I always tried to send a quick note like, really good point, thanks a lot. Or so in that way, I found that I got better acquainted with the technology in a way that helped me to keep that connection, if that makes sense. So it still feel like it suffered, but I feel like there are tools out there. And if I were to always be teaching remotely, I could see how we could really meet students on their level using the tools available.
Wonderful. It's an excellent comment. So I think it's the time I want to use the comment from an audience to conclude our session. So this person said the session was very informative and helpful. I love the students' testimonials, appreciate their participation. I salute all the presenters for their creativity and flexibility and hard work. And thank you all for the session. So thank you all very much for the wonderful presentation and sharing of your knowledge, your experience. I'm sure we will do a great job in teaching and helps our students learn. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Have a good rest of the day.